Good afternoon. I'd like to welcome everyone to our City of Little Rock Board of Directors agenda meeting for the November 30th for the December 7th City of Board of Directors meeting. We'll now start. Mr. Moore, I think you want to make a couple comments.
Oh, stop it.
Mayor and members of the board, we have a modification on obviously item 14 that we want to withdraw, and Mr. Carpenter is going to come back with a resolution dealing with that item on Friday. And then item 12 was inadvertently added, but that is also going to be withdrawn.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. So board members, items 12 and 14 will be withdrawn, but item 14 will be redone in a resolution by City Attorney Carpenter.
State that again, Mayor.
Item 12 is withdrawn, so you can strike through that. Then item 14, you can strike through that. It will be redone into a resolution.
Mayor.
Vice Mayor Hines.
It appears the M1 resolution on the Axon taser purchases and as an addition on the M1 resolution already.
Excuse me, I can't hear you. Apologize.
On the additions page, M1 resolution and M2, looks like they've already been added. That one covers the Axon. If we're taking off I don't know if anybody noticed that. Is that the resolution that Tom's going to be bringing forward? Yeah, information forthcoming. Okay.
That's correct.
All right. It's already on our agenda.
Director Richardson, did you have your hand up?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have a real quick question. It doesn't need to be answered tonight, Bruce or Sarah, but I would like for us to have some kind of guesstimation on what this is going to cost the city if this is approved, including all of the potential renewable options. I know they're going to give us about $13,000 in turnback fees for annually in exchange for emergency dispatch services. So I'd like to know what is this going to cost the city if this is approved along with the renewal terms.
And Director Richardson, just for clarity, which item are you referring to?
I'm talking about the Kemack Village services.
Yes, sir. Mr. Moore, if you will make sure that that request is fulfilled for Director Richardson.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Bruce.
Thank you. Any more questions with items 1 through 11? Director Wright.
Mayor, on resolution number 7 and 8, what type of items are we talking about and up to what price point?
Yes, Mr. Vitesh Patel, who leads our procurement division.
Mayor, City Attorney, Board of Directors.
Mr. Patel, if you'll speak directly into the mic and speak loudly.
Mayor, City Manager, and Board of Directors. So there's not a specific threshold dollar amount or what vendors there are. So these are bid out by other government agencies, so they could be other cities or states that bid these out, and it meets the minimum qualifications for the City of Little Rock and the state of Arkansas. So it allows us to use contracts that we normally wouldn't have access to, which expedites the procurement process, but also allows us to get lower pricing from other vendors.
So how would we as a board ensure that minority vendors are utilized if they're not a part of these purchasing agreements?
Can you repeat the question? Sorry.
How would we as a board ensure to our constituents that minority and woman-owned businesses or vendors are allowed an opportunity to contract with the city if we don't know who these entities are, or what vendors are included in these contracts?
So this does not do an open blanket approval, so we would still have to go in front of the board to get a specific dollar amount and a vendor approved. So it still allows competition to be shown, it just gets shown at a different level.
But you can't tell me what Omnia Partners is, and you can't tell me anything about National Purchasing Partners.
So, for example, I'll use Arkansas state contracts. So the
Right.
city of Little Rock purchases things that the state of Arkansas has already competitively bid out. So for example, our Dell contract is a piggyback off the state contract. So these co-ops are the same concept of the same thing. So they've already shown the competition, they put it out for bid, and then it allows minority vendors to participate on that. It just allows us the opportunity to piggyback off those contracts.
Mayor, I'm comfortable with the state purchasing contract, but I'm not comfortable with these two because I don't know anything about them, and I know how the state does it. But these two, I got some question marks on that. Because, I mean, this is just blindly open, I don't know anything about them. I know the state purchasing contract, I'm familiar.
So Director Wright, so we have two existing ones. So Sourcewell, so if you look at your agenda, we're purchasing a Caterpillar product, two Caterpillar products using Sourcewell contract. So these would just be the same version, but just a different entity. So it would be the same type that Sourcewell was already vetted. So both of these organizations were vetted through procurement in the city of Little Rock to be approved, assuming they approves through the agenda and through the board.
Vetted through who?
Vetted through procurement. So it still meets the minimum qualifications for city code and ordinances and Arkansas state procurement law.
Director Wright, I think the real point is that where these come in handy, particularly are when you need to get a software package that deals with something you're dealing with, and if we go straight to the company.
You can't get that.
Yeah, and this way we can go straight to the company. In terms of minority participation, the statute talks about cooperative purchasing agreements and allows the city to enter into them so that they can utilize the services. But that doesn't change the policy question from the board of what do you want to do. So if Department Director X came in and said, I only want to use this particular cooperative purchasing, and the city finds out, well, wait a second, it's really not as fair to all vendors, then you don't have to use that. You just put it out for bid. And that's okay. Ideally, you will use cooperative purchase agreements as little as possible so that you can deal with more vendors. It's not like we're giving up bidding. It's that there are going to be certain instances where bidding may not be to our advantage. Using Director Warwick as an example, because she used to work for the phone company, you can have everybody bid for a phone service and get 10 great things, and the lowest price won't come near to meeting your needs. On the other hand, you may be able to find out this is the type of thing that we need, this is the value that this is to us, this is on the cooperative purchasing agreement, we can buy straight from that person and don't have to bid, and that's where the advantage is. One of the issues that was mentioned earlier were the tasers. Axon is on one of these particular cooperative purchasing things. We know when we bought the tasers and what we bought and from who we bought them that we'd always be buying from them. The same way with Motorola radio. Once we put that in back in the 70s, we knew we would always be dealing with Motorola. But this gives us an opportunity to make a direct purchase that we know that we need and can budget for, as opposed to a bid that may or may not get us what we're looking for.
I understand that with those type purchases, but how do we know that minority vendors are included in these?
If you're going to be dealing with any kind of federal funds to purchase something, you're going to be having minority vendors involved anyway because they have certain restrictions. I think the purchasing department in the finance department, because of the board and the mayor and the city manager made it quite clear what we're trying to do in terms of making it a more equitable field. And if I can say one thing about the purchasing department, they pick up things that nobody else would see. So they're pretty good at that part.
All right, with your assurance then, okay, I'll accept that. Thank you.
Director Wright, I just wanted to add, it's item 8, the national purchasing partners, that includes the Axon for the tasers. And because of the volume going through these cooperatives, we're actually getting better pricing than if we went direct to the manufacturer on the tasers. So that's the reason we utilize these, is even in a situation where there's only one company we can buy from, or one manufacturer, in this case, Axon for the tasers, their being a part of this agreement gives us the opportunity to purchase those at a lower price point.
I'm familiar with purchasing agreements. I was a certified procurement manager on my job, and I had to be that in order to be a manager. So that's why I'm asking these questions, Mayor, because some of this stuff slips through the cracks, and then you get caught later, and everything gets questioned, and then you got to go back. So I'm asking the questions on the front end, and I'm hearing from the city attorney, I'm hearing from my purchasing director, finance director, and the purchasing manager. So if things come up, do recall that questions were asked.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you so much. Director Adcock?
Yes, I would like to have item number 9 and 10 held separate. Last year in campaigning, this item came up quite a bit as we was campaigning, and I would like to know what the cost is to Little Rock for the service being extended to Camac Village. Also, at a time when we are hearing from our citizens that 911 calls are not being answered in a timely manner because of us not having enough 911 operators, and when we are giving away out this service to the Camac Village, that means that our citizens may be waiting and we're giving it to someone else. I would like to know the cost to Little Rock for this, the cost that Camac Village is paying for this, and I would like to have them held separate.
Yes, ma'am. They'll be held separate. Mr. Moore, you want to answer those questions, or I don't see Chief Hubbard.
Well, Mayor, that was a question. That was the question that I initially brought forward. It was a cost to us. We know that Camac Village.
That is true. That's true.
Camac Village gives us $13,130 a year annually for dispatch services, so we know what we're getting from them. So that was the question that I asked at the beginning of the meeting.
That's true. I do. You're correct. Mr. Moore, you'll just get those answers, the information out to the members of the board. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Director Adcock. Thank you, Director Richardson. Director Wyrick?
Thank you, Mayor. I know item 12 has been removed from the agenda for tonight, but I'm curious to know if it's going to come back in a different form. The thing that I'm concerned about, there are parts of it that I agree with, and that is that we need to raise the permit application process from $500. You can't go and buy widgets for your house or make repairs to your house for $500 or less anymore. Plywood's gone up. Someone told me that it was like $75 a sheet. So I think that we probably do need to raise the permit request amount. The cost per permit, though, I'm not necessarily in agreement with that, but you might look at the cost of material the way it is today, and if you want somebody to fix their broken windows, or you want them to repair their roof or their outside boards, et cetera, it just costs a heck of a lot of money today to make those even minor improvements. So $500 doesn't go a long ways today, if you can find the material. The other issue is finding the material. So I hope we put that into some sort of study or consideration, that we can help our folks that want to make repairs to their homes and make a difference in our neighborhoods.
And we talked about that we would bring something back after the first of the year.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, I just wanted to add those thoughts to maybe the process. Maybe you can take that into consideration. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Director Warwick. Director Phillips?
Thank you, Mayor. My question is similar to Director Richardson and Director Adcock. As it relates to number 10, I understand that it's they help us, we help them with Camac Village as it relates to police services. And I was trying to get an understanding from either you, Mayor, or the city manager. I can understand what they would need from us, but what, being the second newest person on the board since Director Miller took that from me, what services do we receive from them? I was just trying to get an understanding of
I
that.
think that'll probably be a better question for Chief Hubbard.
Okay.
Good evening, Mayor, members of the board, city manager. When we're talking, Director Phillips, to your question, and I think Director Adcock may have spoken slightly to that as well. When we're talking about, it's basically mutual aid. It's where, let's say, for example, a storm comes through, it sweeps up the majority of your resources as far as first responders are concerned in a community. Then you would have the ability, through this type of agreement, to utilize, they will come in and support your city until you're able to stabilize the situation. And it's the same way it happens around the country, especially in fire services, where if there's a large fire, you absorb the majority of your resources, then you have that agreement with the neighboring communities. If you need assistance, they will come in and support your community where there will be no interruption to the degree of services for the rest of the community.
That makes sense to me. Appreciate it, Chief. Thank you. That's all I have, Mayor.
Any questions for items 13 through 20? Director Wright? Was your hand up?
Resolution number 20, I spoke briefly to Mr. Carpenter and I spoke with Mr. Moore, and there seems to be some tweaking that's needed to this resolution, but the purpose of it is to ensure that board meetings that are held in our wards are coordinated with the board member or through the board member, and that we are aware of it. I'm not talking about posting that you all got to post this and that, post that. If you all are hosting a meeting in Ward 6, I feel like that meeting I should be notified about that meeting, if not the meeting coordinated with me. So that was the purpose of it. So if that needs to be tweaked, Mr. Carpenter can do that.
Yes, ma'am. We'll work with Mr. Moore to make sure that's accomplished.
And if any of my colleagues have anything but to add to that, but that was the purpose.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Director Phillips?
Thank you, Mayor. Again, I have a question about the budget. I guess that's number 19 on the agenda. I think a couple weeks ago, Director Wright originally asked the question, and then I piggybacked her question about targeted community development dollars. We received a correspondence from the city manager talking about some of the challenges in addressing that, and allocating the $5 million or some number to those targeted community development areas that we voted on earlier this year. I don't want us to give up that easy. I know we voted to try to be intentional in those parts of town. So I'm wondering whether the mayor or the city manager, is there something else we can do to ensure that we're being targeted with the dollars? I understand we have limited dollars, but that doesn't mean that these families and neighborhoods shouldn't get the attention that we told them we were going to give to them back in January of this year.
No, I totally agree with you, Director Phillips. As you know, Target Community Development, which was spearheaded by Director Wright, as well as yourself and many of the board members that voted for that, it is of the utmost importance for the city of Little Rock. We truly believe it's equity at work. We are happy. One of the things that we don't do a great job of is making sure that many times we're doing work in those areas, and we're just treating it as work. But truly, after you all pass the targeted community development, we're able now to identify those areas that we're doing this type of equity work right now. For instance, this board passed, I believe, 14 lots in the John Barrow area, which is a part of the targeted community development. Normally, we just would pass it, and Director Wright will be aware of it because it's in her particular ward, but that literally is targeted community development. I want to say it was several hundred thousand, if not $1 million or so. I can't remember the exact number, but if you think about the targeted community development, there was a commitment to spend, as funds are available, at least $5 million each year for the next 5 years, and that's $25 million. I think one of the things, because we asked staff to be responsive to the members of the city board, to really take a look at all of the work that we are doing in those areas right now. We're doing, when you take into account bond dollars, grant funds, and things of that nature that we have with federal funds, as well as within city funds, we're doing a lot of work with the existing funding. Clearly, we know the city board, the intent was to get new funding. We're looking at ways to get some new funding from those particular areas, but what you'll begin to see, and Mr. Moore will line out what you'll begin to see in the different agenda items. Mr. Moore, you want to share that?
Sure. As a result of that discussion that we had that night about those 14 lots, not only were the department directors asked to evaluate what we're currently doing, but going forward on the agenda, we will identify areas or agenda items that we feel fit within the parameters of the resolution that you all passed. So, and I agree with the mayor, and you all are the ones who passed these, but we are doing a lot. And you just look at our PIT dollars. That's those dollars are really only spent in those 4 wards. And that's not even really included in some of the numbers when we start adding them up. But so we'll try to identify, and I know that the goal was additional money. That was very clear. And we talked about that. It'd be not only existing, but additional money.
And then to add to that, we also have heard, and again, this board passed an advisory committee to come up with recommendations on additional projects. We know the city director, Wyrick, is a part of that committee. We look forward to hearing from them on some additional things from that standpoint. But also, again, we gotta continue to do a good job of sharing exactly in the target community development areas. To give another great example, we talked about the affordable housing in Ward 6, but City Director Richardson joined me because he's been doing, at one point in time, that particular area is a part of his ward, so he's been doing a lot of work. We made sure that Director Miller was invited. He had a conflict where we looked at and basically took down the old Advanced Auto on Asher Avenue. That's a part of targeted community development, one, because we had to take down that dilapidated building that had become a criminal haven, as well as a homeless encampment that was dangerous for our homeless residents. And so that's targeted community development. I want to say, Director Collins, that was around $200,000. So when you really start to think about it, I think we're going to find that we're doing more than the $5 million each year that this board wants to do. But again, we understand here that we want additional money as well, and we got to continue to be intentional. And so you have our commitment that we're going to be very intentional about the equity work that's being done.
Okay, thank you for that, Mayor and City Manager. I do have 2 follow-ups just to make sure I understood what was said. So I think the City Manager mentioned they're going to be listed on the agenda items similar to when we say, Ward 1, it'll say targeted community development area. Is that what you mean? Okay. I was about to go lawyer. Is that a yes? I just want to be affirmative so for the record.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. And then secondly, Mayor, did I hear you say that we're going to see line items, or are you just saying that's how it's going to be operated from staff?
We're going to be able to communicate with you. From a budgetary standpoint, it's hard to do that from a line item standpoint,
okay.
But we'll be able to share with you what dollars are there.
Okay.
And you'll be able to see that in forthcoming agendas as well.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, City Manager.
Director Wright, then I believe Director Wright.
Question concerning the budget. Last time I had put in a budget request, and Mr. Moore sent back and said that it needed, my budget request, line item budget request, needed to go through the Children, Youth, and Families Commission. And I asked Mr. Carpenter for a legal opinion regarding that. Does a budget request from a board member have to be approved by a city's commission before they can be included in the budget?
No. The board has a policy of doing expenditures in certain areas that are reviewed by some of its commissions, Children, Youth, and Family, the Parks Commission, the Zoo Board of Governors, and so forth. But nothing about how those are set up prohibits the board from taking action directly. That's a legislative action. It's the quintessential legislative action, and you are the legislative body.
That's what I thought. So I would like that line item budget request considered, Mayor, Mr. Moore. I can resend it if I need to.
I believe you sent it to Mr. Moore. And, Mr. Moore, you want to respond?
Typically, and I believe in the merits of the request. It clearly is a prevention and intervention type funding, and we typically, and I believe Director Wright has even participated in this, to where she would make a proposal to the CYF, and it was reviewed by them. And ultimately, this board is the deciding factor. And I do believe that the additional dollars would be available in the overall PIT budget or CYF budget. But I've never, for a significant number or significant amount like this, we've never just said, all right, we're gonna take, this amount out of the PIT or CYF budget. Community schools is a good example. The board wanted to get that accomplished, and we presented that to the CYF commission. So I wasn't suggesting that they had to approve it, but because we typically have taken those type of requests to them first to get their endorsement.
I still don't see, are you saying I need to take it, or are you saying you're going to take it? Because I'm requesting a line item budget item to be included in the 2022 budget. That is my request. How you get that accomplished, I leave that up to you.
And I'll just say again, it would be my recommendation that if we're going to move forward with that request, that it would, the appropriation would come out of the CYF funding. And the board doesn't typically just say we're going to take those dollars. And it's just like the conversation we had last week. The budget's balanced right now. If there's a request that's added, then something's going to have to be reduced. And we do have $1 million worth of contingency, but we need, for a city our size, a budget our size, we need that and probably more. So my suggestion was just that if we want to move forward with this concept, and right now there are a lot of RFPs that community programs that are issuing, but I have never, during my tenure, just said, okay, we're going to take X amount of dollars out of the PIT budget without some discussion with the CYF.
I'm asking for a line item in the general fund budget for request that I submitted to you. However you get that done is okay with me, but I feel that as a board member, I have a right to request that. If you're gonna submit us a balanced budget and we can't make any changes to it, why even submit the budget to us for review? That's my question. There's no point to this. This is pointless. So I'm asking for that line item to be included in the general fund budget. However you make that happen, that's up to you. But that is my request, and I am not withdrawing it, and I will not vote yay on this budget unless that is considered. Thank you.
And Mayor, I wanted to get back to the targeted financing part. I think Bruce hit what a lot of people are already saying, that we're already doing that through PIT dollars, and we have a number of different entities that are targeting some of these same areas to address different social ills. I think the challenge is to have an intermediary to put all of us at the table, because you have all these different entities working in different parts of our city. They're not talking to each other, with each other, so they, in fact, and sometimes working in conflict with each other rather than working in concert with each other. And I think, Mr. Moore, what we got to do as a city, do a better job of using these dollars to leverage and bring in foundation dollars, showing that we're having a commitment to these areas, and bring in large foundation dollars to address some of the issues that we're trying to address. We had the same thing with the NSP 1 and 2 money funding, the federal funding that's over now. It was targeted in some of those specific areas we're talking about right now. A lot of new homes you've seen built in wards 1 and 2. Director Miller were from those funds. I think some of those rehabilitation, redevelopment of homes from the NSP2 money. I know Director Adcock was at one of the press conferences at Mr. Hines' homes. So we have funding, some of the funding, and they're operating in silos. And I think that until we get to the point where we have somebody who can bring us all at the table, everybody together who's involved, whether it's the county, the state, or a foundation, or the city, and do some kind of comprehensive coordination, these things are going to still operate in silos, and we're going to still see what we're getting right now, a lot of hits and misses. So I think that's a great idea, Director Phillips. I think it's incumbent upon us to figure out a way to use our commitment that we're doing annually internally to attract additional dollars to help support and leverage and expand that work. And I think that's the biggest challenge we're having right now with that, because I'm glad Bruce said that, because a lot of people are all saying, well, what are you guys talking about? We are doing targeted funding. We're doing PIT funding, and all that funding is going to those areas for social ills. They're going to those areas for some of the problems that we're facing in our city. And until we figure out a way to address public safety, we're using those dollars as community building mechanism to address public safety. I think we'll still be in this place where we're just doing this hit and miss. And I agree, Director Phillips and Mayor, we need to do a better job of figuring out a way to attract more dollars and utilize what we have right now more comprehensively.
I totally agree, and that's the reason why we've asked our department directors to go line by line to see what those dollars are, and I'm grateful for our department directors who've done that. I think once we, in addition to the PIT dollars, the general 3/8 bonds, grants, and things of that nature, I think we're seeing millions of dollars that we're doing towards that, and we'll be continuing to identify that as we go through our different agenda items. So thank you so much to the department directors who've been working for that and driving equity from that standpoint.
Absolutely.
Director Webb.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And this is a follow-up to what City Manager Moore was talking about just a few minutes ago and to this discussion. Are we including the funds for the community schools that are being spent in this area in the
Yes, ma'am. And Sarah, how about you just give a very brief, just kind of when we asked the department directors that, oh, you were waiting for me to ask you to come up. I'm sorry, I apologize. But yes, the answer to that, Director Webb, because Director Webb, you're aware that I believe out of the 8 community schools, there's probably 5 or 6 of them are in those particular areas, and so those dollars are part of it as well.
Yes, the $5 million allocation that we provide for children, youth, and families, as Mr. Moore said, it goes to the commission and they allocate those funds, and that does include the community schools. And that was designated by the board a few years ago specifically to have a minimum amount toward that. We have not put that specifically in the budget, designating the 5 million, because as Mr. Moore said, the commission meets and allocates that and develops that list of programs from the $5 million allocation that we provide. But it does include the community schools.
Thank you. Director Warwick, is your hand still up? Yes. Director Wright, is your hand still up? No. Okay. Director Richardson, is your hand still up? Just want to make sure. Okay.
My hand was up. Did you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
I was up
Okay.
too.
Thank you. Are you ready?
Yes, ma'am.
I just wanted to get back on the targeted community initiative. Now, this may be splitting hairs, but we may be spending money in places in all the wards that were a part of that targeted community resolution. But we all have areas that we feel like need to be targeted. In other words, the area that I have outlined, they have the worst crime, they have the highest health issues, they need streets, they need drainage, they have substandard housing. And so if we're gonna talk about targeted, we're not talking about shotgunning where we're doing it all across the wards. And I don't want anybody to think that that's not appreciated. It needs to be done. But when we're talking about targeted, we need to be looking at those that are in the most need and focusing money. That's where that extra 5 million was to be focused on, was the areas that had the most need. So I understand that we're doing a lot of work in the community. I get that, and it's most appreciated. But I think we need to focus on the word targeted and look at those areas that are in the most need and try to put some money forward for those.
Totally agree. And I think, again, once you and the members of the Targeted Community Development Advisory Committee provide that list, that'll be very helpful as we are identifying those new funds. Director Richardson?
Yes, Mayor. Yes, real quickly, I just want to remind us, for a point of clarification, we passed a resolution. We didn't pass an ordinance. We passed a resolution that had no funding attached to it. An ordinance would have been our preference, but we passed a resolution, and I think we're doing a good job with this conversation here today of trying to make that come into fruition. But we didn't have any funding dedicated towards what we're talking about right now, beyond what we're picking and choosing right now and labeling. But that we passed a resolution, not an ordinance, and I think what we had was confused some folks. I think Director Miller brought this up a couple of weeks ago. He was confused by it because I think that was part of some dedicated funding that was part of an unsuccessful sales tax campaign that we had. But the resolution that we passed had no commitment, no legal authority over any funding streams we had within the city. And Mayor, I want to thank you for including that in your package to try to get that addressed on a long-term basis.
Thank you so much. Director Hines?
Thank you, Mayor. I've got some questions on the budget for Sarah. Sarah, how do we handle part-time employees? I know we have part-time, full-time FTEs and budgeted in there. How do we budget for part-time employees within our budget that we're looking at?
We don't budget by specific part-time employees. We budget a lump sum amount by department based on the average that they're using, because there's a lot of turnover in these positions. People work a different number of hours. Some of them are seasonal. So there's not, unlike personnel model where we actually have full-time salary people that we anticipate being here for a year and we budget based on that job grade and all, we budget a lump sum amount, and then the department director is supposed to work within that budget.
Okay, so how is that lined out within those budget items? Because I don't remember seeing that as a line item in any of the budgets we looked at.
It's in the personnel cost.
Okay, I'd like to see that broken out by department as a line item to how much we're budgeting for part-time employees. And the concern is I saw some part-time positions that were advertised that I'm curious, what do we consider part-time employee? How many hours a week or less?
I think that they have to be generally less than 36 hours is defined. Now, sometimes in a particular season, they may go over that, and then go back down to 20 or 10 or not at all for a period of months.
Well,
But it's less than 2,080 a year is generally,
2080 is 40-hour work
that's
week.
full-time.
That's full-time. I'm trying to, okay, so I always thought the threshold was around 30, but,
I mean, in many cases, it's 20 hours a week. It just depends.
well, I want to see that lined out for each department under the
Total
personnel
lump sum.
cost.
Do you
what
want typically when we budget it, we also include, of course, the city's share of the FICA and Medicare, but that's the only benefit.
Right. Well, and then at what point do we as a city, when you start talking about 36 hours, when do we start paying benefits? Because we've had issues, I know federally, once a person goes over, if they draw overtime, that we're federally mandated to start giving benefits because they switch from being part-time to a full-time employee, even though they may be classed as part-time.
The Affordable Care Act did have some requirements associated with working over a certain number, and we do an analysis of that and include health insurance for positions that hit that 36 hours. I believe and HR will have to speak more specifically, but I think over a certain number, they may get a day of vacation or something like that, but for the most part, there are no other benefits.
Okay, well, then
There's
there
no
are
pension,
benefits
there's
because
no-
it seems to me that we're defeating the purpose. The reason for using part-time employees is if we're not needing them all the time and that, so that you don't have to pay benefits. So I'd like Bruce or Mayor, if we can get HR to give me the write-up on all the legalities of what we consider part-time and at what point, how many average hours do they work? Do we have to start paying benefits such as health insurance, paid time off, that type of stuff? That's all benefits. And I'd like some roll-up on that. Because it concerns me because I looked at a job posting that was part-time and it listed the part-time hourly rate between $20 and $28, but then it listed the salary range as $41,600 to $58,000, which is for full-time. And if it's part-time hours, why would we advertise a job saying you could make 40? It just didn't seem. And it seems to me that if we're hiring, if we've got 3 or 4 or 5 part-time employees that work between 20 and 36 hours a week, that's the equivalent. The only thing it's not an equivalent of is we're not paying full-time benefits. So at some point, there's a threshold where you cross over. And I'd like some detail on that. But that seems to me we've always been something we've missed, that we don't see what that part-time, because it's rolled into personnel costs, and I want it separated so I can see it, please.
All right, we can provide a detail of the part-time by department. It is part of that total personnel, but we will provide the portion of personnel that is part-time to you separately. I do want to say that there are very few that I'm aware of that hit any of those thresholds. And there are, for example, multiple employees at the zoo that may work 20 hours a week, and that's by desire or by season, the same as with parks, where you don't make those full-time positions intentionally.
Any more questions, Director Hines?
That's it.
Director Adcock?
Yes. I also would like to know how many interns we have in each department, and do we pay interns?
Some are unpaid, and sometimes in the summer they're here for a few months and they receive a pay, like a college student or something that is working as an intern for a few months.
Okay, I would like to see the same information that Director Hines has, but also on interns, how many in each department, and if we are paying them.
Okay, we don't have interns as a separate category. They would just fall within part-time. So I'll poll departments to see if they have any
And
interns.
maybe you don't know this question answer, but do we have any undocumented people in the city of Little Rock?
I believe we should have a representative from HR here. I do know that we go through to make sure they're eligible for hire in the United States. I don't know if we're, and they have to have a social security card. I'll have to ask,
I know-
or documentation, but I'll ask.
I know that right now we're having such a hard time finding people to clean out ditches. And yet in some of our community, we have lots of men that would love to have a job, but they are undocumented. But several of them have lived here for a number of years. And so I was trying to think if there was a way that we could look at these individuals filling some of those ditch digging and other jobs that we seem to not be able to keep.
Well, the city would definitely have legal issues of not obtaining the appropriate information in order to withhold taxes and pay them to the federal government for any compensation. So typically what we've done when we've had a program to benefit the homeless or other workers is we work through a nonprofit agency and contract that out and have them provide that service. That's not something that we can do.
Something similar to what we do with the homeless program, picking up trash? Okay, thank you.
Director Hines?
One other question. Under any circumstances, should part-time people be working overtime hours? And maybe that's an HR question, but it seems to me if we've got part-time people, that's a question that's been asked.
I would answer that question. The answer is probably a yes. We have a ton of part-time folks who work overtime hours in public works.
They typically are working into a full-time position.
Yeah.
But I mean, I can run a query to determine.
Thank you.
Director Wright?
Yes, my question, I guess, is for the city attorney. If we can't make any changes to the budget, why do we have to review the budget?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the last part. If we have many changes,
Mr. Moore mentioned that the budget is balanced, and if we make any changes, that something will have to be reduced or something. Well, if we can't make any changes, why are we even reviewing the budget?
well, you've got some factors of the budget that are aspirations, and you look at that area, and if you want, $50 to do X, I'm using a low amount, and you put $50 less into an area that isn't mandated that the city do, that's how you have to make the adjustments. You have to look at that.
So my request for a line item just needs to be looked at by the city manager and the mayor to see how they would fund it.
And I would always include the finance director.
And the finance director. Okay, that is my request, Mr. Mayor and city manager. Thank you.
May I comment? As I said, the program, the merits of it are, outstanding, but it's $150,000 a year for the next 3 years, and we would typically go through a public bid process. We would typically have some time, and so I'm not saying that I'm not supportive of it. I'm just saying that at that amount, we typically go through some type of process, and whether it's the CYF or and so that's what I'm trying to come to some conclusions on.
Well, you can't have a bid process if there's no allocation.
And
That's where I'm trying to get to, is to the allocation. The program will take place at West Central Community Center and will be open to all kids throughout the city. So it could be made a part of that budget, or it could be RFQ, however you want to do it. But if you can't, how are you going to have an RFQ if you don't have an allocation?
And Director Wright, that's what I was saying. I feel very confident that because of the pandemic and the fact that we haven't been able to spend all of the allocation, and in addition, the CYF receives another $5 million, $5.5 million starting next year. I believe we will be able to fund, I guess what I'm saying is that there are sufficient dollars to fund this type of program. I think we've got to figure out how to go through that process.
Well, I'm glad you're confident because I am not confident. And the entities that I know that have applied through that process were not ever successful. So again, my request is for a line item allocation. That appears to be the only way that I can get something allocated to address the issues that I'm seeing and the needs that I'm seeing. So that again, that is my request. Thank you.
Director Adcock, is your hand still up, or was it up from earlier?
No, that was it.
Director Richardson?
Thank you, Mayor. I want to follow up on Joan's point about the request for some of the manual labor in certain parts of our community. Bruce or Sarah, whoever's in response, who's responsible for this, I would like for us to seriously look at making this a part of our reentry program. Unlike in the 90s when the source of the violence the colors was red and blue, the colors now for a lot of the violence is green. And I'd like for us to figure out a way to get some of these people who will not be adverse to manual labor. They will not be adverse to any kind of labor, but they include those ex-felons as well, as we're talking about the group that she just described, that if we can do that in a real comprehensive way, because that seems to be the source of a lot of our violence right now, coming from that particular group. So Bruce, whatever we're gonna do, you guys are planning on doing what Joan made reference to, I'd like to have that group included as well.
And that's a good example of what I was just talking about, a process that we have to go through because we're doing that. We just put out an RFP for some sort of a day labor type of service because that's what we were hearing from Dwight, and that's what we were hearing from Brother Wayne, that these individuals, they want to work, and so we've actually put out an RFP for a organization to help, very similar to the Bridge to Work program that we have. And that's going to restart here after the first of the year. But I mean, we hear that, and this is an example of us reacting to it. And I'm very hopeful that it's successful. But they'll work daily and they'll get paid daily.
Great.
And
I'm great. I'm glad you're thinking about that. You guys have been looking about that because that's really critical. And I know you've been involved with the Young Adult Opportunity Center and work with that population. So that's a great example. And thank you. And Mayor, thank you for working with Mr. Moore on that as well.
Thank you. Director Miller?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Just a couple of questions to make sure I understand this process, the budget, and it's obviously new for me, Director Phillips. So when I look at this, there are 2,216 full-time positions in the budget. I'm looking at that correctly, I guess. But the general fund includes 1,727 in full-time. So that's part of that 2,216, the full-time salaried positions. On page 36, I got an old budget. A couple
Sarah,
of questions. And Sarah, before you answer that, on page 24, if my budget is correct, what I had been given a couple of weeks ago, is that still what you have?
So,
As the pie chart, general fund revenues?
is this the November 9th presentation?
Um,
What page?
It's November 9th.
Okay. Page 27?
Oh, page 24.
24. Okay. That's a revenue pie chart, yes.
So it says 226 million on mine. That's a typo, isn't it?
No,
It's supposed to be 222 million, right? I was looking at this thing and thought I discovered another $4 million
no,
somewhere.
you're right. It's 222 million.
So that needs to be corrected, right?
Right.
I tell you, I got excited, Mayor, when I saw that. I thought we had another $4 million somewhere, and none of the rest of the numbers came
Right,
up
and
to that, but
if we add that pie chart up, it should be the 222. That was a typo.
okay,
The
that's
provided
typo.
total.
Okay, thank you.
But you asked about employees.
Yeah, let me get my mind rolling, because stuff comes out slowly at times. So, I've read where we have 2,216 full-time employees, right? Looking at page 36 now.
Okay. Yes, that's what we're saying. And then if you back up to page 34, that's the portion of that total that's in the general fund. And then on page 35, the 56 positions, that's the portion that are paid through special project allocations. And then on page 36, you've got the waste disposal fund. There's 145 in that fund. There's 212 in the street fund, 62 in fleet services, and 14 in vehicle storage. So they're all in different funds.
So that's what comes up to the 2216.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Let's see. Where do we show on line items overtime for salaries? Is that
That's part of the personnel budget. So in that separate, personnel is a category that includes full-time, it includes pension, health care, part-time, overtime, shift differential. I mean, there's many, many different categories of pay, particularly in police and fire. And that's all part of the personnel cost, the cost of the personnel that operate the city.
okay here? Another question I have, make sure I understand. When we have this is that personnel savings, trying to get to,
Vacancy savings.
yes, vacancy savings. Explain vacancy savings to me.
So those 2,216 positions, not all of those are filled on every day of the year. You know, I mean, the headcount changes daily with retirements, with people leaving for other positions, or with new hires. So when we budget those full-time authorized positions, we budget those that are here based on their current salary and step and grade and any assumptions, like in this case, we've got a 2% salary increase in here for those that are currently here. For the vacant positions, we budget those for union groups. We budget them at the entry level to the union, a new fire recruit class, a new police recruit class, unless the vacancy happens to be at a lieutenant level or something, and then we will budget at that lieutenant level. For non-uniform positions, we budget at the midpoint of the range based on the grade that is given to that position. So we budget all those positions initially at 100%, because the intent is to fill every vacant police position, every vacant fire position. Then the vacancy savings is it's an estimate of the amount of that 100% that would not be utilized just to normal turnover. So typically, that's in the neighborhood of 5%. We budget a little bit less than that as an offset to the full 100% personnel cost because of the effort to make sure that we're filling 100% of police and fire vacant positions and that type of thing. So we don't budget at the full 5%. But since we don't know where those vacant positions are going to occur, we don't know if there's going to be a vacancy in finance or in HR or when those things are going to happen, we budget that initially just as a credit amount in the executive administration budget. And as those vacancies occur, as positions are vacant, we allocate that and reduce the personnel budget of the actual department where that vacancy occurred. So that nets then by the end of the year back down to our net personnel budget.
So our vacancy savings, 6 billion? What was that?
In the general fund, the vacancy savings, I believe we've got it up with the November or 16th presentation. We increased it a little bit. It's at 6.7 million, but 5% of the personnel cost in the general fund is actually closer to 8.7 million.
I'm gonna have to process some of that. I appreciate that. I just had no idea of how we come up with that. And I appreciate that.
Yeah, I mean, there's a period of time when any vacancy occurs, just for advertising to fill the position, going through the interview process, and it does take a little bit longer in police and fire because of the recruit schools that they have to go through. So you can't hire 2 weeks after a police officer leaves, you can't get a new police officer in. You have to have a recruit school to be able to fill those vacancies.
So our incentives that we put in there, that extra 300,000,
That's to try to attract people to come to recruit school and graduate from recruit school.
okay. You have to graduate, obviously, to get that money.
Yes, and then you have to stay for a certain amount of time, or when you leave, a certain portion of that incentive is reduced from your payout.
It's been your experience that works? We seem to have a lot of need for recruits, so is that your opinion that works? That may be for anybody. That may be for the city manager. I mean, does this extra incentive work?
I believe it does. We put it in place probably 6-7 years ago, and we saw a dramatic increase. Then to some of the budget reductions we had it ceased for a few classes, but as the board is aware that it's back and or in place. And the other thing I would also say besides that incentive, if you live outside of Little Rock and you buy a home, and this is not only for police and fire, but this is for any city employee, then the city will offer you $5,000 for a house, $2,500 for an apartment. So, a new recruit that lives in Cabot, if he or she graduates from the academy, could, and he or she decides to move to Little Rock, I mean, you could be looking at about $15,000 in one-time money. So law enforcement, public safety is even pre-pandemic is tough to recruit. And we've always looked at incentives as being helpful. And I think the chiefs would say that when it was in place, it was very helpful.
Okay, so there's a report that shows the results of the funds that we put up there.
Correct.
Okay. And the other big change that I noticed in the budget was on contracts. Sarah, that $4 million change, $4.4 million. What's that on page 42? The general fund expenditures by category, and it's reduced by that much.
The primary reason for that reduction, that was in comparison to the amended budget. And you'll recall that just a few weeks ago, the board in the budget amendment approved a $5 million contribution to the port for land acquisition for the most recent economic development announcement. And so that is not set to recur in the 2022 budget. That was a one-time allocation.
Oh, okay. How much was that again? I'm sorry.
It was $5 million.
Thank you. And just from my own understanding, of course, you guys probably already know this. It's not a balance sheet, but where is our rainy day fund? Where does that show up? We have a rainy day fund of what, 11 million?
That's part of the fund balance. And so what we're presenting here is a balanced general fund budget, but it includes a $1.1 million contingency. And so that is in case we have unanticipated expenditures or if we miss a revenue forecast. and need to maintain that balanced budget. And that's part of the financial reporting ordinance that we include a contingency, or it's part of the financial policy ordinance, excuse me, that we include a contingency in each budget of at least 0.5%. And so that's included here. If it's not needed, then that's available to go into increase that $11 million reserve.
Okay, so that's what we have now by ordinance, that we keep that?
We actually,
So there's
Sarah,
two,
explain,
there's-
when people hear rainy day fund, it can mean many different things. Explain all of the restricted funds that we have,
right, well.
which adds up to be more than
There's
that.
all kinds of restricted funds, but in the general fund, the $11 million is a restricted reserve fund that the board implemented back before I came to the city, and it was intended to be 10 million or 10% of revenues, whichever was greater by, I believe, I want to say 2000 and I can't remember, maybe 2008, wherever the time frame came, we never got there. We got to the 10 million, but we never got to 10%. And that's when we had the big economic downturn in 2008, 9, and 10, and we weren't able to add to that reserve. And then, anyway, that's the restricted, and that has some very strict parameters around how funds could be expended. The city manager has to come to the board for a major emergency and indicate that there are no other funds available to meet that need. Now, in addition to that, we have regular the fund balance that is the accumulation, just the net of revenue and actual expenditures each year that builds that. And that is needed just for operating cash flow or anything else. So part of what, because for example, our sales tax revenues are typically, in the past, heaviest in the fourth quarter of the year. Our property tax revenues are collected primarily after the October due date. So there's, but business licenses are due in January. Well, our expenditures are not they don't vary with our revenue flow. So if our major revenue sources are coming in the second half of the year, we've still got to pay police and fire and everybody the first half of the year too. So you have to have a certain amount of operating flow, which is provided through our cash and our fund balance. And so when I was talking about that, when we were talking about our financial reporting ordinance, I had told you that 17%, which represents 2 months of expenditures of that operating budget, so about 17% is what your minimum fund balance should be for operating purposes, according to the Government Finance Officers Association for a government. Could be higher depending on where you live, what other type of unusual circumstances you typically have. But what we're trying to get to is at least that 17%, and then we want to be able to have this restricted reserve as well for an absolute emergency.
Okay, thank you.
But as far as other restrictions, there are funds that are restricted for debt service, like the millages that we have for the street and drainage bonds. As soon as those bonds are retired, that millage goes away. It's restricted only for that purpose. Street and drainage funds that we receive from the state turnback or the county road tax, those are restricted for streets, roads, bridges, trails, that type of thing. So there are several different funds beside the general fund that all have restricted fund balance amounts for those purposes. The general fund is really the residual fund. It's everything that is not restricted outside the city by some other, like by a voter approval or some other restriction on the revenue dedicated to that fund.
Okay. Let me ask you, how much are we going to receive in American Rescue money? That's before I came here, obviously. This is a second tranche, is I guess what I've heard it described as. How much is that going to be in 2022?
Okay, I don't have the exact amount, but I think it's about 18.7 million was the first tranche, and that's about the amount of the second tranche, and that's it. That's the end of it.
Okay. And of course, this budget includes how that money is going to be spent?
No, it does not. This is the operating budget that we brought to the board. The first tranche came before the board with a recommended allocation, and that's tracked in a separate grant fund that is specific to that American Rescue Plan. So it's not part of the operating budget. But that's where, and there are certain categories based on the law and the plan that passed, that where there are eligible expenditures under certain categories. And then there's another category called lost revenue. So the city had to do a calculation, including all of our component units, not just the core city, of our lost revenue measured in a certain way. They dictated how to measure that. And we believe that the funding, both the first and the second tranche, because of that lost revenue calculation, that we do have more flexibility with how that can be expended. It doesn't have to fall necessarily in a specific category outside of that. So, for example, the infrastructure category only allowed water improvements, you know, in accordance with maybe the Clean Water Act, or certain sewer improvements and broadband in areas that were underserved based on a certain percentage and speed and all kinds of measurements. Did not include any streets or roads or anything like that. But in the lost revenue category, we can use that funding for targeted development of a street or sidewalks in some of those communities. So that's in that memo, I think, that the city manager sent. That was one of the areas of funding for next year that was a possibility, was that second tranche of funding. It's not an ongoing source, so it's not something we want to hang our hat on for the future.
So when do we get a chance to look at how that money is being recommended to be spent?
Well, so we expect to receive it in May. That was on the anniversary of when we got the first tranche. And so the board submitted requests on how the first tranche would be spent, and that was looked at in addition to things that department directors submitted. The mayor and the city manager put together a recommended plan and brought it before the board, and the board discussed it and approved it, I think, at 2 or 3 different sessions. So the same process would be utilized, I would imagine, for the second.
So you say the board submitted requests
Yes.
on how to spend this money. So each board member submitted their ideas?
Yes, they did.
Okay. All right, thank you. Thanks, Mayor.
Thank you, Director Miller. Director Hines?
Yes, Mayor, I'm going to have to leave a little early to go to Major Dean's visitation, the MEMS major who passed away this week. I just wanted to put one comment on our emergency declaration discussion. Tom, that expires when? We set it for 120 days to review every 30, correct?
Right, and I don't have the exact date in front of me, but pretty soon.
Okay. Well, and my
it was
question
April the-
is, we keep
It
having
was
this.
March the 31st, I think, is when it was put into effect.
Right, and we renewed it.
August,
We renewed it in August.
yeah.
So my question is, we keep having this on as a policy discussion and agenda meeting. Should we not be having this discussion because it's an ordinance and it's an emergency declaration in our actual board meeting next Tuesday?
Director, Vice Mayor Hines, ideally that would be the case. The way that the law works is that the mayor makes the declaration, it continues, but after 120 days, the governing body here, our board of directors, can decide that they do not want it to continue. That would take action at a formal meeting. When the last one was put into place, to assure that we had the periodic discussions that were set up in the order they were set, and they ended up falling on agenda meeting dates.
Well, I find it hard if this board was to take action if we're having discussions on agenda meeting dates when we're not actually in session. So that's why I was looking for some guidance as to why it's happening like that.
That's how it happened, and the guidance would be if the board says we don't want to continue this, then I'll draft the appropriate
But
document.
how can we do that in an agenda meeting, Tom? We're not an official session. How can we direct you to do something to draw it? We'd have to come back and vote on it?
You're going to have to come back and vote on it. You're not going to vote on it here, but, you know, over time, I've gotten pretty strong messages as to which way the board was headed and drafted accordingly.
That's fine. Thank you. I just have an issue with the no state of emergency currently existing at the state level. So as to why we still need one. And that'll be my thoughts, and I have to leave. Thank you.
Director Adcock.
Yes, I have a question for Sarah, please. Sarah, the first round of this 18.7 million that we received, what is the balance of that account now?
There have been several commitments against it. It has not all been expended, and we have through December of 2024 to have all of our commitments and to have the funds committed, and they have to be fully expended by December 31st, 2026.
But what is the balance right now?
I don't know off the top of my head. I know we did expend right away the one-time bonus for city employees, and that was approximately $3 million. This was all passed in, I believe it was early September or late August, and that payment went out in September. We're working on the September financial report right now, and you'll be getting that this week, and so it'll reflect that. Now, commitments since then, there were fire truck purchases. Those take a long time to get in, so there's a commitment for that. There's things like that are committed but not expended.
Okay, I would like to see a balance on that account and also everything that we have spent out of that account.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Director Miller. Your hand, are you done?
No, I thought I took my hand down. I'm sorry.
All right. Director Richardson.
Same thing, Mayor.
Director Wright.
That was my question. I wanted to see a balance of what was remaining because I'm trying to recall whether or not any of my recommendations were even included, and if they were, I'm not aware that they were.
We'll provide a list of what you approved as to how it be expended and then where we are with the different projects.
All right. Any more questions in regards to the budget? Moving forward, we know we have on executive session, and we'll discuss appointments at our next meeting. We'll now transition out of the agenda meeting. We'll now move into the policy discussion. Director Campiris is chair of the COVID-19 Healthcare Task Force. Any commentary?
I would urge that we continue doing what we're doing. If you look at statistics from UAMS, the number of cases are up 25% in the last 2 weeks. If you look at hospital admissions, they're up. I did not hear the governor's conference today, but I think he will be saying, or his department will be saying, that we are getting ready to have another surge. We have the uncertainty of a variant that we really cannot define yet, and I think we are doing the right thing, even though I know Lance doesn't like doing it, but we are doing the right thing by continuing our emergency declaration, and I would stand by that.
Thank you so much. Any more comments?
Yeah, Mayor,
Yes.
and Dean, you could probably, Director Campiris, you can probably tell me this, or Mayor, you probably could too. Exactly what is the emergency declaration?
Frank, you want to define it?
Mr. Attorney, if you explain that, just want to make sure stated correctly.
The emergency declaration deals with the strong endorsement that businesses and others should wear masks and that there be masking on city properties.
All right, thank you.
Thank you so much. Director Wright,
Before mine is not on that. So if we,
we're in the policy. So
so I'm done. I don't have any questions on
do you want to make a comment?
On something else.
Please.
Mr. Moore, I turned in a request for some repairs to be done to the John Barrow entrance sign at Barrow and Colonel Glenn a number of months ago, and no repairs have ever been made. And I know it's been, if not 6 months, more. Public Works had those installed, and apparently somebody hit it, and I know I turned it in at least twice. And Barrow and Colonel Glenn. Also, too, I had requested that code enforcement review a house that was running a mechanic shop out of the backyard. And I've seen our neighborhood code enforcement go there, but I don't think that's their jurisdiction. I believe that would come under Public Works. I think they're two different code enforcements. I'm not sure, but I keep getting complaints, and I went by there and I saw a hitch out like you're pulling a motor. So that looks like some serious repairs to me, and there are always cars with the hood up. So can you follow up and please let me know what staff has found out about that? Thank you.
Director Richardson.
Yes, Mayor, real quickly, now that we've moved from the emergency declaration, listening to our questioning and comments about our budget, I want to caution us that there's a fine line between being policymakers and micromanaging City Hall, and I want to just caution us and remind us that we're elected as policymakers, and it's real easy temptation to get into micromanaging the activities that you and Bruce and the city staff are responsible for. I mean, I think that it's our job to come up with the policies, but I think it's a slippery slope that we get on sometimes with respect to comments and or questions about budget and implementation of budget. So I just wanted to say that before we got out of here tonight.
Mr. Mayor.
Director Wright.
Mr. Carpenter, Director Richardson has brought that up several times, and I need a clarification on our role. If we are not to ask questions about the budget or to take a deep dive into anything, if we're just to come here and rubber stamp, is that what we are to do? My constituents expect me to know what's going on with this budget. My constituents expect me to address issues and concerns that they have in the neighborhood, in the community, and the way we do that financially is through the budget. And if we can't make any changes to the budget, if we can't question the staff about what they put in the budget, they don't discuss putting together the budget with us. This is our only opportunity. So I would like to know what our role is. And if you need to put something in writing to us, because I'm tired of hearing that we're micromanaging when we're asking questions that we don't know the answer to. If I leave out of here, or if I put in a budget request, then I expect that it is up to the mayor and the city manager to try to make that happen. So will you please give if you can give some clarity now, and if you need to put something in writing, I'd appreciate it.
Director Wright, you know, one of the most important jobs of a governing body is to figure out what they wish to direct their resources to in the governance of the town. In municipalities, you got to pick up the garbage, you got to pave the streets, you got to send police and fire. After that, and because we've got the utilities, we don't have to worry about electricity or sewer or water, and because of the school districts, we don't have to worry about operating schools as they do in some cities. After that, it becomes a matter of what are the city's priorities? And the state statute gives the manager and the mayor the responsibility to come up with a draft of a budget. But a draft of a budget is not a fait accompli. So without,
Not a, what was that? That was Latin?
yeah, meaning it's automatically happening because it's said.
I just want to make sure everybody understands what you're saying.
In any event, I think I'm between two board members, so let me say this. What is micromanaging to one may be good policy making to the other, and you were all elected to do both.
Thank you, and I appreciate that, and I couldn't have said it better.
All right. Thank you, members of the board. This meeting is now adjourned.